Hello, welcome to Philosophy Roulette number 157. Oh my lordy lord. 157, where we get philosophy off the internet and read and review it live and try to make some sense of the world, which is seemingly failing at the moment. That is, me making any sense of anything. Okay, but that doesn't mean I can't try to talk about some philosophy. So, this is what we did this morning. This was not a bad paper. It was a good paper. You can see Philosophy Roulette 156 if you want to. We were looking at all this stuff. I didn't see anything else that was particularly, oh yeah, film philosophy. I had that open. Let's take a look at film philosophy. See what's new, if there's anything new. Alright. So I have not looked at anything in terms of film philosophy. Lacan and film noir, 3 pages. I wonder what that is. Maybe that's a 2016, it must be a review. Yeah. What is it? Bentire 2016. Yeah, Bentire is out of Lacan. Okay, that's cool. Let's see what else we got. They're all reviews. Everything else is too long. Oh, that's sad. Okay. Alright, yeah, because, yeah. Maybe I'll have to put a slight pause on my length moratorium and maybe, I don't know, do a half a paper one in the morning and then the second half at night or something like that. And it becomes an issue if I'm like an hour and a half in and I'm still not done, because, I mean, it's not like I got huge amounts of viewers, but frankly, who's really going to sit there waiting for me to read a 2-hour paper? So, okay, so that was worth looking at that, and I'll have to come back to it. Let's see, what's 2019 maybe? Alright, ooh, Herzog. Filmmaker as philosopher. This also looks like a Richard Eldridge wrote Werner Herzog. So that looks also like reviews. Yep, reviewing it. So these things are... Okay. That's too bad. You can see how all of these are got the name first because it's about what they've done, about their book. Alright, so that's slightly sad. I was hoping to talk about some films that would have been cool. Sufism in cinema. Well, that's kind of cool. The Prince Who Contemplated Soul. Huh. Wait, maybe this one is. We can talk about District 9. That was a fun movie. This article analyzed Neill Blomkamp's Academy Award winning to District 9 to investigate the pop similar neoliberal ideological positions. Yeah, because I heard some analysis of that one, and it was fun. Because it was sort of reversed the colonialism narrative. Unfortunately, do I have access to this? Ooh, looks like I might. Let's get the PDF. Let's take a look. See how long it is. Looking at like 16 pages. Oh, it's long. But because it's going to be fun, let's just take a quick look at how terrible it is. Alright, good enough. Just because it looks like a different sort of topic, let's go for this one. And, yeah, cool. If you want to grab the paper, it is in the chat now, and you can always type exclamation point paper for getting a hold of it once you're in the chat and if you don't see it there. So the exclamation point command will make it pop back up. Cool. Alright, by Stephen Trinder, High Colleges of Technology, Abu Dhabi. Alright, This article explores the role of key characters and scenes in Neil Blomkamp's hugely successful science fiction feature District 9, which was now shockingly 11 years ago, and we have not learned anything in the last 11 years. To investigate the extent to which popular cinema might support neoliberal ideological positions. As a film that received prominent attention for its condemnation of neocolonialism and corporate capitalist intentions, District 9's suitability for analysis in this context becomes significant in an epoch in which the validity of neoliberalism is under intense public questioning after a series of high-profile economic and humanitarian crises have exposed its inherent unworkability for the majority. Yes, we have major problems, and they've been building. Neoliberalism can be defined as much a cultural phenomenon as it is an economic doctrine, comprising a historical relationship to European colonialism and 20th century American imperialism. Yeah. American imperialism. This is the where we're at right now. This article defines it as an ingrained set of behaviors, beliefs, and modes of thought concerned with the proliferation of the intellectual, cultural, political, and economic superiority of Anglo-Saxon Christian identity and values. Capper and Wagner propose that neoliberalism is identifiable with a history, structure, and set of relations related to European colonialism, whereas Apoduri, on the other hand, defines it as the new global cultural economy. Krishna's discussion articulates an explicit historical link in more detail. Although the specific terms of post-colonialism and globalization have become popular only in the past 2 decades or so, they emerged from a far longer intellectual history on the growth and decline of various regions and nations in the world economy and the intertwined histories of capitalism and colonialism. Actually, just an aside, speaking of science fiction things, I was watching which was it? Ghost in the Shell, and it was like a standalone complex, one of the TV shows of Ghost in the Shell, and America had broken up into a few different blocks in that alternate future, and the one that was like basically the most historically United States was now Imperial America. So they just gave up the pretense and just went with Imperial America. That was in the because there was like a new United States, and then there was like an Imperial America, and that always stuck with me. I just there's definitely that group of people here that would just be more than happy to just be like, yeah, we're Imperial. I think we're seeing that a lot right now. Okay. For its analysis of District 9 in this neoliberal framework, this article will draw from Slavoj Žižek's psychoanalytic theory of ideology, which was introduced in his 1989 book, The Sublime Object of Ideology, and then elaborated upon in his 2009 critique of contemporary liberal democratic capitalism, first as tragedy, then as farce. And first as tragedy, Žižek claims that neoliberalism is so embedded in our global political, social, financial, and technological culture that, rather than be identified as the root cause of many of the world's current socioeconomic and environmental problems, since the decline of the Soviet communism, it has had to adjust as its primary raison d'etre in such a way that it is now widely accepted to be the only medium through which these difficulties can be solved. Something that Fisher and Kremen agree with. According to Žižek, the concept of ideology relies on an essential naivete on the part of the self or subject, quoting Marx, who many years ago defined ideology simply as something that the people do not know but they are doing. Žižek instead claims that in the contemporary epoch we, the people, in fact know full well that neoliberalism has inherent flaws and contradictions, but continue to participate in its regulatory processes regardless. This creates a unique paradox that underlies the analytical framework of this article. Considering the assertion that ideological reality will dissolve if we come to know too much, as Marx may have claimed, the word "too" in the previous statement has become crucial in properly understanding the process today. Now, the very ideological foundations are supported by the knowledge that the system is to some extent flawed. Instead, Žižek writes that the cynical subject is often quite aware of the distance between the ideological mask and reality, but still insists on the mask. Hence, Žižek's stance is that various anti-capitalist movements over the world today exist merely in the form of an ideological fantasy that structures the social reality. Reality is a fantasy construction which enables us to mask the real of our desire. ideology is a fantasy construction which serves to support our reality, itself an illusion. The function of ideology is not to offer us a point of escape from our reality, but to offer us the social reality itself as an escape from some traumatic real kernel. In the case of cinema, this article proposes that the traumatic kernel is the indirect responsibility of anxious audiences in maintaining a social, political, and economically exploitative agenda of neoliberal domination propagated by a vanguard of neoconservative governments and corporate stakeholders. The guilt resulting from this fissure between what is perceived as being necessary to ensure the continuation of neoliberalism, economic subordination, cultural appropriation, and human exploitation, for instance, and the disturbing knowledge that the individual may be somewhat responsible in the detrimental process that results from it is filled by a resulting social reality exemplified in the rise of so-called cultural capitalism, or in other words, capitalism with a human face. Kremen discusses the evolution not of exchange value, but of social value, that in the post-political era serves as a political and commercial function, in which the act of consumption works to allow the subject to indulge the fantasy of removing themselves from the ideological order. This article takes into account works by Kremen, Zizek, and Prudhomme to define this notion of cultural capitalism as a phenomenon wherein notions of charity, ethics, and social concern have come to be included in notions of consumption. Though largely under-researched in a cinematic context, recent Hollywood appears to follow commercial products like Starbucks, Nike, and Ben & Jerry's and promoting discourses of ethical and social concern for the sake of its investors and customers. Selected contemporary Hollywood film examples like Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, Cameron's Avatar, and Matt Reeves' Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, for instance, display clear anti-capitalist pro-environmental and ethical themes, which initially seem to critique neoliberalism. However, each film can ultimately be said to support key aspects of the system through justifications of cultural and racial hierarchies, economic imperialism, and Western ideals of freedom, liberty, and individualism. Taking this into account, this article seeks to investigate the extent to which District 9 follows aspects of cultural capitalism and neoliberal validation through 1. An exploration of how far Multinational United, MNU, fulfills an anti-capitalist narrative, 2. A scrutiny of lead protagonist Vickers van Vendemerwe. You could just say Sholto Copley. You could just say Copley. Vickers van Vendemerwe. Yeah, Vendemerwe. Role in liberating the alien prawns, and 3. An examination of space in the film and how it might stabilize District 9's ideological underpin. Yeah, I've seen District 9 a few times, so I will know what's going on in this article. Just, funnily enough, this is the one time I've done the background work. I have seen this movie more than once, and I do know exactly what happens in it. The one time I was not expecting to have background knowledge, I actually have background knowledge. Okay. District 9 as ideological revenge fantasy. District 9 is relatively unique in that it was a box office success in the United States, despite its setting entirely in Johannesburg and its strong contextual references to South Africa. This is highlighted well by Valdez Moses et al., who point out the language of the aliens makes use of clicks which a South African audience will likely associate with the distinctive phonemes of San, Khoi, Xhosa, or Zulu, lends credence to this identification. Some of the most sensational revelations of the film, aliens are being used as experimental test subjects by scientists working in labs of MNU for the purpose of developing new weaponry, may allude to scandalous exposés that appears in the press during the hearings of the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. You know, that's not entirely fair. We've done completely horrible things to our minorities here in the United States, and so this is not surprising at all. In 1998, Dr. Schalk von Rensburg, a scientist who worked in the 80s and early 90s for Rodeplot's research laboratories, testified that his research had been directed towards the development of race-specific biochemical weapons targeting blacks. Von Rensburg confessed that he was ordered to develop a vaccine that would render black women fighting for UNITA infertile. Oh, I didn't know that. That's terrible. But I mean, we have here in the United States, we've definitely tested drugs on black soldiers. There's a well-documented case of that. So we were definitely using our minorities as test subjects, just like they were. The locality of these elements to the plot were surely lost global were surely lost on global audiences of the film, as were perhaps the origin of the derogatory term used to describe the aliens, which was taken from the name Parktown prawn. See, I did not know that. A king cricket species endemic to South Africa. Well, I assumed there was one. That's kind of where it was, though. As well as this, District 9 addresses a number of wider socio-political issues specific to South African society, such as race, Nigerian immigration, and the legacy of apartheid. This did not deter international audiences, however, who, on the contrary, appeared to embrace these themes largely thanks to the film's originality and strong script. Yeah, and we've done equally terrible things, so not so different. Notwithstanding, in addition to addressing domestic issues, District 9 also makes significant references to transnational concerns around human rights, military privatization, and the war on terror prominent in the news reports at the time. Compared with typical Hollywood films, District 9's unconventional locale set wholly away from the United States allows for a variable margin of freedom in terms of the way the film approaches historical allegorization, cultural symbolization, and political commentary in both a local and global context. The docu-style opening, for instance, could be interpreted to reflect Weaver Hightower's comment on the popular cinematic mythology of the U.S. as the metaphoric center of the world, lending support to District 9's neoliberal milieu. Here, correspondent Gray Brandon comments, to everyone's surprise, the ship didn't come to a stop over Manhattan or Washington or Chicago followed by. There was a lot of international pressure on us at the time regarding the operation to remove the aliens from the hovering ship. These remarks indicate a particular socio-political gaze to District 9 and the way they reconstruct the popular neoliberal discourse implicating the United States as an omnipresent global policeman with an invariable stake and interest in the actions of the allied nations, governments worldwide. This same theme appears later in the film when a scientist alleges that protagonist Vic's rapidly transforming body represents hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars worth of biotechnology, going on to state that there are people out there, governments, corporations, who would kill for this chance. Whether these lines were included in order to conciliate the American market remains unclear, but the comments certainly represent an interesting reflection of the cultural imperialism present in global cinema, an issue discussed by Rings and Weaver Hightower. This also could have been a plot point, because why would they want to cut him up so bad if there wasn't so much money? I mean, it was his father-in-law that was making the call in the movie, so he was married to one of the top people at MNU, and it was that guy saying, like, they wanted the biotechnology. Well, that means they were clearly making a choice. I mean, yes, there were probably these other things going on, but it would have been a little just sort of crude. Why would they want to kill him or chop him up if there was not huge amounts of money at stake? I mean, it was his son-in-law. Vicus was the guy was standing right there, and Vicus tries to grab his hand, and the guy's just like, "Get off of me." Okay, Valdez Moses et al. Also comment that there is a neoliberal twist to District 9 in the manner in which it presents a South African state that appears to have yielded control to a corporation. Indeed, Hilary Nicholas elaborates. Multinational United, the private military company, stands in place of the government in the film. We never see government officials or soldiers. The very name MNU implies that South Africa is not the only place where commercially minded corporations have effectively replaced regional government structures. As will be obvious to even the most perfunctory observers, on top of the local issues, Blomkamp dedicates a large part of District 9's story to a criticism of multinationals and big business. The perceived diminishing influence that elected government play in directing world affairs compared with that of largely unaccountable private corporations appears to be principally embodied in the inhumane practices of Multinational United. In addition to MNU's institutionalized discrimination against the aliens, the ethically unsound medical experiments that Vicus discovers in the biolab reinforce the image of global corrupt identities that MNU typifies as nothing but greedy, cruel, and corrupt. However, Nicholas's observations here can certainly be aligned with Jones's discussion on the link between public outrage with regard to the invasion of Iraq and the subsequent tendency to depict the primary antagonists in many popular films as members of corporations, governments, or the military. In this way, District 9 would appear to support Jones. For example, at one point, mutating Vicus is described as the most valuable business artifact on Earth. Yeah, this is very close to the other scene when they were described above that it was worth billions of dollars. In another, MNU scientist and CEO display pure uncontained delight when they realize that Vicus is able to operate the alien weaponry that they have so far been unable to activate. Moreover, the scene in which the protagonist is taken to a secret facility and is examined upon demonstrates Heller, Nicholas, and Jones's argument most conspicuously, as it becomes apparent that MNU will be able to exploit Vicus' rapidly transforming body for military use. The organization's director and Vicus' own father-in-law, Piet Smith, gives the go-ahead for the scientist to vivisect the protagonist. This is what I was saying above. The ruthlessness of MNU and its hierarchy is communicated quite bluntly during a conversation between Smith and the lab scientist as Vicus lay strapped to a bed in the research facility. Piet, he's going to turn into one of them, a prawn scientist. What happens to him isn't important. What's important is that we harvest from him what we can right now. This body represents hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars worth of biotechnology. There are people out there, governments, corporations, who would kill for this chance. Piet, well, he will survive the procedure? Scientists, no, of course not. We need everything. Tissue, bone, marrow, blood. The procedure is going to basically strip him down to nothing. Other MNU official. What about next of kin? Vicus, please help me, don't let them do it. And Piet, because that's his father-in-law, I'll handle that. So it's his daughter, and then in the next scene you see him like telling his daughter that Vicus is dead. The heartless intention of MNU's role, and by implication wider multinational corporations, is confirmed here as Smith and his colleagues quite mercilessly place their focus on profit solely over humanitarian and even filial interest. Yeah. This one-dimensional depiction of MNU as an immoral entity could be interpreted as a criticism from director Blomkamp of actual government reliance on private security firms to protect capital investments' interests in resources such as oil or gas. The subject of accountability has been one of increased media scrutiny, particularly in light of events such as the Blackwater massacre of Iraqi civilians in 2007 and the abuses by CACI International and Titan Corporation employees in Abu Ghraib prison. Here, District 9 certainly follows other popular films like James Cameron's Avatar and Wyatt's Rise of the Planet Apes, in which frustrations and anger concerning human exploitation and corporate greed appear to be channeled directly at a private organization. There's also, we've got a long history of contracting out things we don't want on our books, and so it's not, maybe nowadays it's going towards corporations, but it's always been like you could send people to other countries. We've got like a history of rendition here, where we'd send people to a country that doesn't have the same laws, and so you can do things that would be illegal here but not illegal there. So this is just a new form of trying to sweep something under the rug. The subsequent exposure of MNU's illegal experimentation program publicly humiliates the company. However, further scrutiny of the scenario reveals that this apparent condemnation of MNU's inhumanity could be nothing more than a diversion. Indeed, the embarrassment that the whole affair would potentially cause them conceals the likely probability of MNU's continued involvement in the relocation of the aliens to so-called District 10. After all, who else could be charged with the forced removal of 1.8 million aliens to a new location 200 kilometers away from Johannesburg? Also, the end of the movie, they sort of basically say Vicus's assistant says he tried to expose him, and basically they muzzled him. So it wasn't even though everything was, he tried to release the data, like it got covered up. The South African government are noticeably absent from the story and would surely not suddenly step in after originally passing the buck on taking charge of alien-related affairs in the first instance. After risking his life to save an alien, Christopher, Jason Cope, and disappearing into District 9, Vicus himself would also likely to be vulnerable, with Valdez Moses et al. Correctly observing that in the hypothetical continuation of the story, the protagonist would likely be exploited by a new warlord in District 10. From a cultural capitalist perspective, the cruelty exposed in the lab experiments at MNU and preceding exposure of the scandal to the public could be suggested to perform a wider ideological function of providing viewers with the opportunity to remedy frustrations with regard to real-life governmental and business malpractices like the Iraq War or the 2008 economic crash, respectively. Something both Eberwein and Jones allude to, as Zizek claims in this context. The function of ideology is to offer us the social reality as an escape from the traumatic real, which is, in this case manifests the construction of MNU as an object of blame with which an angry, perhaps somewhat apathetic subject can direct their resentment regarding real-life transgressions. Yeah. So if we construct sort of the fiction of an evil corporation, we can be angry with that and then take our anger out on the evil fictional corporation. So let's see. Where are we getting to then? Despite his role as District 9's lead character, the customary position on to which the desires of the subject are often projected, there can certainly be said to be an element of otherness to Vickers' character from a typical Hollywood perspective. This is most likely because the relative creative freedom writers Blomkamp and Tatchell appear to have been handed thanks to the presence of Lord of the Rings trilogy director Peter Jackson supporting the production. Indeed, in portraying the part of an apartheid-era Afrikaans bureaucrat, Vickers does not fit the criteria of the typical Hollywood leading man. His thick accent and relative lack of masculine characteristics, traits that are often associated with Afrikaans men, also highlights a degree of unconventionality to the protagonist within Hollywood codes of characterization. Regardless, previous to his mutation, Vickers is presented as having lived a comfortable life in a nice, quiet suburban area of Johannesburg with his wife, Tanya. The couple are happily married, and in spite of not being a very smart boy, Vickers has attained a steady job at MNU Department for Alien Affairs. He is a relatively happy-go-lucky individual, and he appears to have the respect of his friends and family, minus Tanya's father, who take the time to attend a party organized in his honor to celebrate his promotion. Returning again to Valdez Moses et al.'s roundtable discussion on the film, the authors here agree that District 9 celebrates the dramatic transformation of Vickers into a political hero who risks his life for the cause of universal freedom and racial equality. This initially appears to be an accurate observation. For the first half of the story, the protagonist demonstrates a distinct prejudice towards the aliens, describing them constantly as prawns, reacting angrily to Christopher's son's claims that the two are the same, and also after ordering that a shack containing a number of alien babies be destroyed, encouraging the viewer to listen out for the popping sounds of the burning eggs. However, Vickers does appear to eventually display shades of compassion as his transformation intensifies. The scene in which he dons a mechanized alien battlesuit is ostensibly constructed by Blomkamp to be the moment he absolves himself of his long-held prejudice and realizes his heroic destiny. Initially, however, instead of helping a captured Christopher, Vickers decides to run away from his apprehended acquaintance as well as primary antagonist Kubis, his cronies, despite the protection that the suit he is wearing offers him. After a short while running, he stops to reflect and overcomes the fear and intense self-loathing that has defined his mutation experience, deciding to return with the intention of helping Christopher. The moment certainly emphasizes a sudden newfound courage in Vickers. With the action returning to Christopher and the MNU soldiers, an abrupt, deadly laser blast kills two guards before the action cuts to a mechanically suited Vickers running towards the camera, all guns blazing. Coupled with the fast attack escalation and dramatic music, the sight of Vickers in the suit approaching the camera head-on creates the effect of the protagonist growing in size, and with this his metamorphosis from reluctant willing hero is signified. Subsequently, Vickers presents a rocket launched by Kubis from hitting the spaceship carrying Christopher and his son to the alien mothership, thereby allowing them to board, chart a course for home, and initiate some kind of future rescue mission. This selfless act apparently highlights Vickers' newfound vitality. He has finally seen beyond his own selfish ends, something he could not do as he ruthlessly battled to prevent his gruesome mutation earlier in the narrative, and committed an act of empathetic kindness typical of the Hollywood hero. Thanks to his sacrifice, Vickers is seemingly absolved of his earlier prejudice towards the aliens, and furthermore also proves to Tanya's father-in-law that he is in fact strong by taking on and overcoming the ultra-masculine MNU. However, despite the reconstitution of colonial white savior narratives, District 9 challenges traditional happy ending discourses like those seen in Avatar. Left alone and abandoned in a township there is nothing left for Vickers to do but to submit wholly to his encroaching otherness. Knowing that he cannot reverse his transformation for the time being, Van Vuren claims that the protagonist takes the role of sacrificial lamb for the viewer in the way that he is thrown in at the deep end of the worst nightmare of white colonial anxiety and guilt. From an ideological perspective, this outcome can be said to work towards absolving the subject of their indirect complicity in the neo-colonial process that Vickers takes the punishment on their behalf. Alright, so they're saying sort of he's the sacrificial lamb and the scapegoat for everyone else's feeling bad about bad stuff. So he just sort of submits, and he's like, well, this is what's going to happen now. Yeah, maybe. In his analysis, Van Buren states that the image of the border and its traversal is crucial to District 9's symbolic use of the city, the body, and social relations, theorizing that the film exists within well-known structures of the segregated apartheid city, the high-rise inner city, the quiet white suburb, and the black township. Taking this into account, it is important now to elaborate on Van Buren's claim to discern the extent it may be considered accurate and ascertain whether it can be contextualized within a neoliberal framework. District 9 physical boundaries appear to be established at the beginning of the film, observable most prominently in the title shot of the alien township. Here, director Blomkamp employs a bird's-eye view shot to draw the audience's attention to a heavily fortified border running vertically down the left-hand side of the screen, which works to segregate District 9 from the metropolitan city in the mind of the viewer. Regarding the township itself, this article is inclined to agree with Neill, who writes that District 9 can be characterized as a typical contemporary urban African ghetto, dirty, claustrophobic, and litter-strewn, with nightmarish labyrinths and alleys. Initially, the representation of the slum in this way can be suggested to illustrate a potential example of Edward Said's colonized space, with the township presented in binary contrast to the rational order of Johannesburg, which Said terms metropolitan space. However, Van Buren's proposal above suggests a progression on this, and needs to be analyzed further. In particular, it is important to identify potential examples of this triangulated spatial structure, and then scrutinize the travails of protagonist Vickers, who can be seen to desperately go to any lengths to reverse his mutation into alien prawn by re-entering District 9, and also the urban downtown city. Early in the film, wife Tanya organizes a pleasant dinner party to celebrate Vickers' promotion. Before cutting to the shot inside the house, we are able to observe that, unlike District 9 slum, the suburban street where Vickers lives is rationally ordered, with straight roads and pavement, manicured gardens, and clean driveways, which denotes a more familiar space associated with the colonizer. Yeah, it's a very typical suburban sort of looking thing. Nice house. Furthermore, while Vickers' suburban home environment contrasts with the disorder of District 9, the depiction of downtown Johannesburg, location of MNU headquarters, is fundamentally different in its construction to other two spaces. Physically urban, hectic and bustling, mentally militarized, bureaucratic and masculine. The corporation's building is located in the heart of Johannesburg city center, a location typically reserved for power brokers of the capitalist order in Hollywood filmic codes of reference. Yeah, it's a giant, like, skyscraping tower sort of thing. At no point in District 9 do we see any characters negotiate these spaces with any meaningful significance except Vickers, who is forcibly removed from this rigid composition upon the onset of his transformation. After ingesting the fluid, well, he gets sprayed in the face with it. I don't know what kind of ingestion that is. Vickers' painful and humiliating metamorphosis into an alien then blurs the rigid lines of segregation initially established early in the film. He is immediately rejected by his friends and family, and then by society. Evidence? That's not entirely fair. MNU put out, like, propaganda against him. So they were, like, he was, like, at first everything was fine, and then they put out a lot of propaganda saying he had done horrible things, and that's why he gets rejected. It wasn't really the metamorphosis, because it hadn't taken hold yet. It was only, like, in one part of his arm. But still, I mean, yeah, it's more that... Okay, let me continue. Evidence of this can be found in the scene in which the fugitive Vickers enters a crowded fast food restaurant. On the television inside the restaurant, an emergency news broadcast claims that he has been involved in a prolonged sexual activity with the aliens and has consequently contracted some kind of infectious disease. Recognize Vickers' face from the press release, the establishment's terrified customers begin immediately emptying the restaurant out of fear of being contaminated. Yeah, but in this our pandemic, that seems like a very reasonable thing to do. Actually, if you got someone like patient zero just walks up next to you. Once outside, wife Tanya then calls him shortly after, in tears pronounced, "I have something to say to you, and it's not going to be easy. I can't do this. I don't want you to hold me again." Yeah, that was very sad. But, I mean, it was her dad putting out the misinformation, so she was in a bad position. Still, maybe some loyalty would have been good for her. She comes around eventually. Despite Vickers' pleas and claims that the report of his indiscretion with the aliens is not true, Tanya ends the call abruptly. Fully aware of his exclusion, Vicus then angrily attempts to chop off his already mutated alien arm with an axe. The scene is particularly significant in the context of this article's investigation, and that the arm can be said to represent a symbolic indication of the protagonist's impending otherness. The irrational act of self-mutilation that Vicus inflicts upon himself could be interpreted as a desperate attempt to be once again accepted by something akin to a hegemonic ideology manifest within the spatial construction of the film. Yeah. The ongoing anxiety of this boundary may be broken at some point. That this boundary may be broken at some point could be suggested to expose the societal anxieties within the neoliberal subject in a number of ways. For one, it lays bare the traumatic reality of discrimination, racism, and colonial residuality that still remains at the core of the collective psyche in neoliberal society. More so, it could also be suggested that the protagonist's transformation represents an ongoing anxiety vis-a-vis the possibility of disasters such as the 2008 global recession, which occurred just 1 year before District 9's release, reoccurring sometime again in the near future. Hello, pandemic and race riots in the United States. The fallout which might possibly serve to exclude many from the supposed socioeconomic privilege of the ideology is much in the same way as it has been done here with Vicus. Yeah, this is, we are in the midst of another tragedy right now. And I don't mean to be laughing, but it's just sort of, there's not much else to do. Either you laugh or you cry. I choose to laugh right now. Hence that which threatens the subject in District 9 appears to lay in the possibility that the ruling ideology may reject any individual that does not comply with its rigid demands of conformity and the mental and physical lines of segregation that it constructs. If one acknowledges this, then such a theory goes some way to explain the enduring totality of neoliberalism today and why the subject indeed knows it but still is doing it, as Zizek suggested. It reveals that the subject is perhaps driven by an anxiety that the comparative, comfortable, but ultimately flawed neoliberal paradigm may reject them. Such a proposal would concur with Fisher, who writes that proponents of the liberal democratic model often justify the system with the simple pronunciation that it is the best we have. They have decided to say that all the rest is horrible. We may not live in a condition of perfect goodness, but we're lucky that we don't live in a condition of evil. Yep, this is basically what a lot of people are saying right now about the current situation. It's like, well, stop looting. It's not good, but you shouldn't do that. Very bad. It's like, sound how bad that is. It's terrible. Vicus' wife, Tanya, in particular, seeks to maintain a segregationist agenda in the story, demanding on a number of occasions that she would desires a world where humans and aliens do not interact. Well, she just wants to go back to the way it used to be. Make South Africa great again. Make their marriage great again, maybe. For example, after initially stating that she does not want to see Vicus again, she phones her husband a second time in tears, declaring that she just wants everything back the way it was. The protagonist also wants that same thing. Moments after the call, when Christopher announces that the fluid can be used both to reverse Vicus' transformation as well as empowering the alien mothership, he enthusiastically declares, "I can go home, you can go home, you can take your boy, you can take all the prawns with you." He even becomes a cold-blooded murderer in his attempt to maintain the segregationist order by killing a number of MNU employees when storming the organization's headquarters with Christopher. Well, they drew first blood, not him. I don't know what that counts as. This possible ideological, he does make a point. Of saying we're not going to kill anybody. Then he goes kills people, and then Christopher goes, well, "You said we're not going to kill anybody." He says, "They shot at me." So they said they drew first blood, but I guess the author here is correct still. But yeah, there was that little bit of like momentary hesitation. Momentary. This possible ideological agenda goes some way to undermining Vicus' supposedly altruistic behavior. He was completely not altruistic yet. It was only after he lost everything that he became altruistic. And even if at that point that even counts as altruism, I don't know. Indeed, this is explicitly confirmed, though, when, after successfully obtaining the fluid and returning to District 9, Christopher tells Vicus that it will be 3 years before he can fix him. He states that he must first go back to the alien world in order to get assistance for the population of subjugated extraterrestrials stranded on Earth. Vicus reacts angrily to this by knocking Christopher unconscious and recklessly attempting to fly the command module up to the alien mothership himself. In this moment, the irrational behavior of Vicus was not irrational, it was just evil behavior of Vicus. Selfish. Highlights an intense desperation on his part to stop at nothing in his attempt to restore the status quo. It is only when Vicus resigns himself to his impending otherness that he turns his attention to the alien's cause, and this in itself could be interpreted to be part of a wider objective of ensuring his transformation back to human form when Christopher hypothetically returns to Earth. The violent act he commits upon Christopher in knocking him unconscious demonstrates at once both a prejudiced contempt for a dehumanized other, as well as a selfish dismissal of the alien's predicament. In other words, the supposed grand act of altruism displayed towards the pawns at the film's climax is ultimately a selfish act, meaning that, in the end, one of District 9's central messages is to maintain the strict lines of mental and physical segregation with the other or risk ideological rejection. I'm not entirely... I think that it's not that you can completely discount Vicus's transformation at the end. Yes, it became... a bit, there's always the selfish thing and he wants to go back the way he was. I think by the end he may have doubted that Christopher would ever come back and fix him. I mean, he said Christopher did say he would come back and help him, but because of how dangerous everything was, it's sort of his disregard for his own well-being at that point and the unlikelihood that everything would work out still does imply that he had sort of gone for broke to help Christopher, even though it would also help him in the long run, or potentially help him. He did sort of go for broke in helping Christopher. He said, get your son home. So it's like he finally sort of did the fatherly thing, I would say. So even though it isn't necessarily altruistic, but it didn't seem entirely selfish either by the end. Yeah, that was a nice line. So go rescue your son or whatever he was saying. So there was something else going on right there too. Okay, neoliberalism in District 9. This article argues that District 9 works in support of neoliberalism by creating a social reality that deflects genuine criticisms of neoliberalism's role in continued socio and economic marginalization and ongoing human suffering. This is observable in hollow criticisms of corporate capitalism vis-a-vis MNU, and ignorant misinterpretations of the alien other that serve to reinforce discourses of neoliberal superiority through tacit endorsement of cultural capitalism as morally and ethically superior to an imagined corrupt corporatism. This trope ultimately renders the film more desirable as a product for commercial consumption among audiences in the current epoch of increased attention to social responsibility. The overall portrayal of MNU indicates that District 9 follows other popular films produced around the same time, like Cameron's Avatar, the Wachowskis' and Twyker's Cloud Atlas, and Jones' Moon, in its attempt to explicitly chastise military brutality and draw attention large corporations' focus on profit over humanity. Blomkamp's comments in an interview would also support that this is the case. In particular, the exposure of MNU's illegal experimentation program at the film's climax is constructed to humiliate the organization publicly. However, there is a contradiction here regarding the fact that MNU will continue their involvement in the project to relocate the aliens to District 10. Taking this into account, this article would adapt readers' discussion on individual film characteristics and claim that MNU and other fictional institutions like them can be suggested to draw upon a deep reservoir of popular resentment, simmering in the wake of the various socioeconomic crises of the 21st century. Moreover, such scenarios like this film provide a dual ideological function for the viewing subject. In developing a scapegoat for colonial and capitalist exploitation, the subject is not asked to consider their ongoing indirect complicity in propagating this form of neoliberal violence, allowing similar real-life atrocities to continue unabated. So by giving us MNU being so evil, it sort of allows us to feel good just by distracting us by being angry with MNU and ignoring everything that's happening in the rest of the world. Alright, makes some sense. District 9 disseminates Vicus' desperate desire for return to his comfortable life through a combination of traditional colonial white savior tropes and more contemporary discourses associated with cultural capitalism. Here we see the other is saved by the white hero, who simultaneously metes out some form of reified retribution against prejudiced corporatism. In older films, this latter element was so markedly absent, only making an appearance in the last 20 years or so. Supplementing this, District 9 reconstructs colonial and cultural hierarchies central to neoliberalism. in order to transmit a scenario wherein the subject is made to feel grateful that they are constituents of a particular form of identity antithetical to the miserable existence of the other. Here the desires and anxieties of the subject are at once embodied and played out through the actions of lead protagonist Vicus, whose own degrading and humiliating descent into otherness serves to reinforce the superiority of the hegemonic ideology. Unlike Avatar, for instance, a film in which the fantasy aspect of the story largely invokes a positive reinforcement of the qualities of neoliberal identity as linked to colonial discourse, this article puts forward District 9 constructs an alternative, more disturbing method of ideological adherence by constructing a social reality that portrays Vicus' comfortable existence as being forcefully taken away from him after he ingests the fluid. So in Avatar, which is interesting, you have this also a bodily change in Avatar too. I hope that's not a spoiler for anyone. Yeah, so yeah, well, he goes native. What's it called? In Avatar, the main character goes native somewhat by choice. He gets enculturated and then goes native, decides it's better than what the people are doing. And District 9, it's by force, so it's taking it away. That's what they're saying. It's forcefully taken away. So in Avatar, it's not forceful. It's gone native. The main character chooses to take the what they call them, the blue monkey side of things. What was the name of their tribe? I forget, but it's okay. It's the native, the indigenous folks. Okay. From this point in the narrative onwards, District 9 presents Vicus desperately attempting to reverse his transformation to prawn so that he can once again be accepted back into society. This is sought after at the expense of almost 1.8 million extraterrestrials, exemplified in the scene where Vicus crudely dismisses the alien situation by knocking Christopher, their one chance for salvation, unconscious in order to fly up to the alien mothership himself. This scene demonstrates an example of neoliberalism's core principles being displayed in an era when various economic, environmental, and social crises have been brought to the supposed supremacy of the system under sharp criticism. Released a year after the world financial crisis began and amid ongoing conflicts in the Middle East, District 9 addresses these events but ultimately justifies neoliberal ideals through the portrayal of an essentially inferior alternative, the miserable life of the other, which is embodied in the alien prawns. Taking the findings of this article into account, it is crucial not to lose sight of the fact that as political elites in many countries scapegoat immigrants for their neoliberal economic policy failures, the truth that audiences must confront is that instances of apathetic disavowal at supposedly archaic apartheid-style practices seen in the film and discussed in right-wing media conceals a very real possibility of a return to the darkest moments of historical white racist brutality here and now. Wow, when did this get published? This is from last year. Didn't take long. Yeah. Alright, fun article. It was, this is, I definitely did not think that this was so pro-neoliberal when I saw the District 9. It was more that I just got the surface level corporations bad sort of thing off of it. Granted, I don't remember last time I saw it, but it was a while ago now, so I mean, I was closer, of course, to the financial crisis and sort of the, because I mean, I think all of 2 bankers got jailed in the financial crisis, and those were like the first 2 people. They just took a deal because they thought everyone was going to jail, and they're the only ones that actually went to jail. Everyone else got off on something else, at least here in the States. I know other places are different. So this analyzed District 9 in sense of making neoliberalism okay, because still in the end Vicus was trying to get back to the way things were, and by the way things were, it's sort of the old, like, sort of being part of the old hegemony, the old power structure, where he had a nicer life, and because thankfully he wasn't still a prawn, as it were. I mean, there's a refrain now. I mean, even no matter how much you rise up, you're still a black man in the eyes of the the world here in the United States, perhaps most illustrated by going black while birding. The guy was immensely like accomplished, and in the end, someone attempted to death him by cop. So it was pretty disgusting what happened. So yeah, so it's just like, I guess that's the point this article is making. Even though you're not, it's like, even though things are bad, you're still not part of the hated minority. So, okay, I had not thought about that, but I still would give Vicus a little bit more credit. As I said, in the end, he was it wasn't come back and save me. It was go and save your boy. He said that sort of thing, so that Christopher could go rescue his son and make sure his son had a better life. So there was something there that family. There was a little instance of family that made a difference. Also to Vicus, and it wasn't so much only getting his body and life back, as it were. Any questions by the folks out in the viewing audience? Please let me know. It's an interesting comparison. Also, I would like to, if someone would do some sort of comparison between District 9 and Avatar, because in both cases, I hadn't thought about it, but this makes a very interesting parallel right here, where they talk about Avatar versus District 9. In both cases, the main subject undergoes a change to be into the body of the indigenous people or the minority. Avatar, it's in some sense by choice. Well, it's not exactly by choice at first. It's a sort of a job, and then they choose to stay that way. And then District 9 is not by choice. It's by mysterious fluid that changes Vicus, not by choice, by force. So, the fantasy aspect of this story largely invokes a positive reinforcement of the qualities of neoliberal identity as linked to colonial discourse. Okay. See, I don't know enough about this theory to actually understand fully what's going on here, but the District 9 is much more... Yeah, so the fact that, like, the neoliberal sort of... It's still just sort of accepting of it in Avatar, the neoliberal state of the world. And that gives the main character in Avatar the choice to go live differently and reject the company that he's working for, versus in District 9 there is no choice, but it's even in the absence of the choice, then you basically end up supporting his wish to be go back to the way things were. Okay. So, an interesting compare-contrast of Avatar and District 9 would be fun too. Alright, that's it for now. If anyone has anything else to add, please let me know. But otherwise, I'll be back, I guess, tomorrow. Have a great night, everyone. Stay safe, please.